Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are setting the time coordinates for a really transformative era, that massive stretch, 15,000 years between 20,000 BC and 5,000 BC.
That's huge. And this isn't just, some dusty archaeological time frame.
No, exactly. It feels like the moment humanity really switched tracks, moving from being, well, mobile hunter-gatherers following the ice melt
Right, always on the move.
to becoming more settled and eventually leading to these really quite crowded communities.
It's absolutely the hinge point, I think. And what we really want to do in this deep dive is challenge that old story, The one where early humans just sort of wandered around picking berries.
Passive recipients of nature's gifts.
Exactly. We're looking at the evidence that suggests, actually, during this whole long transition, humanity was already becoming this incredibly powerful ecological force, an engineer, really.
Reshaping environments way, way before we think of big impacts, like before the plow, certainly before the Industrial Revolution.
Absolutely. We're talking about humans as planet shapers, even back then.
So we're kind of ripping up the old paradigm here. The sources we're looking at point to something pretty profound: human interaction with the environment. It was never just passive, never benign.
No, quite the opposite. The argument is that we're actively domesticating whole environments. That's the phrase used.
Using tools much simpler than steel axes or tractors. Fire, maybe. Simple digging sticks.
Fire is key, definitely. But also just sophisticated knowledge. And this created these feedback loops that, well, they changed the planet's biology forever.
It's a crucial distinction to make, isn't it? Because we tend to fixate on the end results of the Neolithic Revolution, like, oh, here's the domesticated wheat, here are the cows.
Right, the finished products.
But we skip over the, 10,000 years maybe, of really complex environmental management that had to happen first, that made those changes even possible.
Precisely. That long, slow burn of learning how to manage the world around us. That's the real story here.
Okay, let's get right into that then. We need to redefine some terms maybe. When we talk about early humans, we use these neat little boxes: hunter-gatherer, farmer, pastoralist.
The standard categories.
But our sources are arguing that this neat separation, this conventional view, it's actually pretty misleading.
Yeah, that's a really critical starting point. Because those categories, hunting, foraging, pastoralism, farming textbooks, often present them as these discrete steps on a ladder, an evolutionary progression.
Like you graduate from one to the next.
Exactly. But the evidence, it just doesn't back that up neatly. It suggests they often blurred together. They existed along what one source calls a vast continuum of human rearrangements of the natural world.
A continuum, I like that. So the same group of people might be doing all of these things.
Absolutely. You might have the same people practicing all four modes, maybe seasonally, or shifting focus over a generation or two. It depended on the local conditions, the opportunities, the pressures.
So we really shouldn't picture the arrival of agriculture as this sudden, clean break, like flipping a light switch.
No, not at all. It's much more like a slow, dimmer switch being turned up, a gradual intensification of practices that were already there in some form.
Okay, so if the boundaries were that blurry, what pushed a group further along that spectrum? What made them invest more in managing their environment?
Well, the key seems to be the level of investment they were willing to make in manipulating the environment for, let's say, a more predictable return, more yield.
Right, and that's tied to how settled they were becoming.
Directly tied. If you're constantly moving, you might manage a very large area, but quite lightly. You burn a patch here, hunt there. But if you start staying put, even seasonally at first,
Then you focus your energy.
you manage a smaller area, but much more intensely. You invest more labor into it. And the number one tool for this large-scale manipulation, the tool that reshaped landscapes globally before coal and steam, was fire.
Fire. Okay, we mentioned it, but let's really focus on that. It's the Neolithic bulldozer, you said. How exactly was it used as an engineering tool beyond just, cooking or staying warm?
Oh, the evidence points to massive strategic use. We're not talking about campfires getting out of control. We're talking about controlled burns, what anthropologists sometimes call patch burning.
Setting fires deliberately?
Deliberately and with specific goals. You could clear out dense undergrowth, the stuff that makes hunting difficult or dangerous.
Makes sense. Easier to see, easier to move.
Exactly. You could also eliminate woody plants you didn't want, maybe things that competed with useful plants. But critically, fire encourages new growth, tender shoots, fresh grass.
Browse. For the animals they hunted.
Precisely. By burning patches, you create better feeding grounds for deer, for wild cattle, whatever your main prey species were. You're effectively managing their food supply to keep populations healthy and close by.
So it's like ecosystem ranching. They're managing the pasture, even if the animals themselves aren't penned up or fully domesticated yet.
That's a great way to think about it. It moves us so far beyond just man the hunter passively taking what's there.
Definitely. Okay, so fire is huge. What other kinds of sophisticated management practices are we seeing? This idea of niche construction sounds like more than just burning.
Oh, absolutely. The complexity is really quite astonishing when you dig into the archaeological evidence, like animal bone assemblages found at kill sites or settlements.
What do the bones tell us?
They show it wasn't just random killing, it was often highly selective hunting. They seem to have understood life cycles, population dynamics.
How so?
Well, you might find, for example, a disproportionate number of young males or older individuals past their prime reproductive age, but fewer prime age breeding females.
So they're culling strategically, taking the surplus without damaging the core breeding stock, like modern wildlife managers try to do.
Exactly. It looks like a sustainable harvest plan. They seem to have understood the long-term carrying capacity of their territory and managed their hunting to maintain it.
They weren't just hunters. They were, like you said, game managers. Professional, almost. What about resources beyond land animals? Waterways, fish, shellfish?
Same level of sophistication there, it seems. We find evidence for active management of streams and shorelines, things like building simple weirs, maybe out of stone or woven branches.
What would those do?
They could direct the flow of water, maybe create calmer pools, which are better for certain kinds of fish spawning, or they could make it easier to trap fish migrating upstream. For shellfish, they might clear predators like starfish from beds or move rocks to create better habitats.
Again, actively engineering the environment.
Right. And it gets even more direct. Some sources document evidence suggesting people were transplanting the eggs or young of desirable fish, maybe even birds, to new areas to establish new populations or boost existing ones where they wanted them.
Wow. That's basically aquaculture, or close to it.
It's definitely active manipulation of habitat. Shaping the environment to favor the species you want, that's the very essence of niche construction. You're building the world you want to live in.
This really does reframe domestication, doesn't it? It wasn't a sudden light bulb moment over a field of wheat. It was this incredibly long, slow process of learning to manage and then sort of domesticate the entire landscape.
That's the argument. Intensifying control over everything, not just a few key species initially.
Okay, so this blurring of lines between hunter-gatherer and proto-farmer, can we see it clearly in a specific example, where a group is managing resources intensely but isn't quite farming in the traditional sense?
Yeah, the example often cited is from New Guinea, with peoples who relied very heavily on things like sago palms and mountain pandanus trees. These were staple foods for them.
Okay, and did they domesticate them, like breed them for better yields?
That's the interesting part. No, not in the genetic sense we usually mean by domestication. They didn't selectively brood sago palms for bigger fruits or anything like that. The plants remained genetically wild.
But they weren't just passively collecting the nuts or fruits when they found them.
Absolutely not. They were managing production intensively. They would clear away competing trees and dense undergrowth from around the palms they favored.
Giving them more light, more nutrients.
Right. In sago swamps, they'd keep the channels clear of debris to maintain access and ensure the right water flow for the palms. And crucially, they actively promoted the growth of new sago shoots.
How?
By strategically cutting down mature palms. This stimulates the growth of suckers, new shoots from the base. So they're ensuring future harvests. They're investing time, labor, knowledge to increase the yield and reliability of these wild stands.
So they're horticulturalists, really, active managers, hands-on, shaping the growth cycle, but without ever developing, say, annual seed crops that define settled agriculture for us.
Exactly. It shows that this deep commitment to environmental engineering, to managing resources actively, was already fully baked into many societies long before what we traditionally call the agricultural revolution. The mindset was already there.
Okay. That detailed picture of local management, that niche construction, sets us up perfectly for this next section. If these small groups were already such clever ecological engineers locally, what happened when Homo sapiens went global? How did these practices scale up?
Right, let's zoom out again. We need to place this human story within the much deeper time scale of hominid evolution.
Put ourselves in context.
Yeah, the hominid story starts way back, maybe 7 million years ago in Africa. And you have groups like the Australopithecines. What's kind of humbling is that they were the dominant hominid species on the planet for something like 5 million years.
5 million years.
Mm.
Makes our run seem pretty short so far. They were upright walkers, right? Capable bipeds.
Yes, capable of walking upright, spreading across parts of Africa, an incredible long period of stability, relatively speaking.
Okay, but then comes our species, Homo sapiens. When do we start making our mark globally, beginning this environmental sweep we're talking about?
Well, our species emerges, anatomically modern humans, around 195,000 years ago, the oldest fossils found in Africa. And the initial spread out of Africa happens, maybe waves of it. We see Homo sapiens in the Middle East, the Levant, perhaps between 150,000 and 80,000 years ago.
But it wasn't a permanent foothold initially?
It seems not. Interestingly, during a major glaciation, a cold snap, Neanderthals, who were better adapted to colder conditions, actually seem to have moved south and displaced those early Homo sapiens populations from the Levant for a time.
Wow. So even then, climate was a huge factor, pushing populations around. We were still reacting to the environment.
Very much so, but then the balance shifts. The really rapid, game-changing global spread seems to kick off around 50,000 years ago. That's when things accelerate.
50,000. Okay, where do we go?
Pretty much everywhere, relatively quickly. Asia is reached perhaps 60,000 years ago, maybe earlier. Europe, around 40,000 years ago, where we famously encountered the Neanderthals again. Crucially, Australia and New Guinea are also colonized around this time, 50,000 or maybe even earlier. That required significant sea crossings, even with lower sea levels.
And the Americas.
That comes later. The crossing of the Bering Land Bridge, or maybe coastal routes into the New World, happens somewhere between, say, 30,000 and 15,000 years ago. The exact timing is still debated, but it's significantly later than the Old World in Australia.
And that timing, especially for Australia and the Americas, is, well, it's tragically significant, isn't it? Because this spread seems to correlate pretty strongly with massive extinction events, the megafauna disappearances.
It's the inescapable correlation. When modern humans arrive in these new continents, new to us anyway, Australia and the Americas particularly, we see a dramatic collapse of the large animal populations, woolly mammoths, giant sloths, diprotodons in Australia.
Gone. Was it just hunting? The overkill hypothesis?
That's part of the debate. Were we just incredibly efficient hunters hitting naive animal populations? Or was it more indirect? Was it our landscape modification, especially the use of fire, fundamentally changing the ecosystems these large, often slow-reproducing animals depended on?
Or maybe a combination of both. Pressure from hunting and habitat change.
Very likely a combination. Our niche construction toolkit, honed over millennia in Africa and Eurasia, was now being applied on new continents. And the impact on species that hadn't co-evolved with us seems to have been devastating. We were reshaping ecosystems on a continental scale, almost right out of gate.
The sheer scale of that is hard to really grasp. So
Yeah.
let's zoom back in again. What did this environmental cost look like at the local level? During this Mesolithic period, as people are maybe starting to settle down a bit more, we have this case study you mentioned, Ringloster.
Yes, Ringloster. It's a Mesolithic settlement dated to maybe around 6,000 BC, so right in our time frame. And it gives us this fantastic, detailed snapshot of what life was like and what the local environmental footprint was.
So not just simple nomadic camps by this point.
Oh, no. If you were there 8,000 years ago, you'd see pretty sophisticated stuff. Well-built huts made of brushwood, maybe hides, really finely made tools, some decorated, evidence of social complexity. And interestingly, domesticated dogs we find post they might have been tethered to, these people were invested in this place.
Okay. And their use of resources, how does that show their impact?
It's specific and targeted. We see this in the wood they used. Analysis of charcoal from hearths and preserved wood fragments, even pollen records from the nearby lake sediments. They tell a story.
What story is that?
They weren't just picking up fallen branches, they were actively felling specific types of trees, particularly lime and elm.
Okay, why lime and elm? Why is that significant?
Because those woods have particular properties, they were the preferred high-quality materials for making crucial pieces of Mesolithic technology, specifically dugout canoes and bows. Elm especially is great for bows. Lime is good for carving, maybe later dugout canoes.
Ah, so they're targeting the best resources for their key tools. Like specialized logging almost.
Exactly. This is deliberate selective forestry. They're choosing the best timber for the job. And over time, that selective pressure would inevitably change the composition of the forest right around the settlement. Fewer mature lime and elm trees, perhaps favoring other species?
They're managing the forest to support their technology and in doing so, changing the local biome.
Precisely. It's that niche construction again, writ small. And it's not just what they took, it's also what they left behind.
Waste.
Yes. The archaeology at Ringloster shows clear evidence of waste disposal. Pits dug, but also baskets full of rubbish food scraps, broken tools, general household waste being deliberately dumped into the adjacent lake.
So localized pollution, starting early.
It's the beginning of the kind of waste management problems we associate with permanent settlements. When you stay put, your trash piles up. Dumping it in the lake might seem like a solution, but it's an immediate contamination of the local water source.
The environmental costs we think of as modern resource depletion, habitat alteration, waste accumulation, they have really deep roots then, starting right here with these relatively small Mesolithic communities making choices about how to live.
They were making strategic, local choices that had real measurable impacts. Altered forest structure, changes in water quality, it's all there in the record.
Okay, so let's pull these threads together. We've got the large-scale impact using fire to engineer landscapes, maybe contributing to megafauna extinctions, and the local-scale selective forestry, targeted resource use, localized pollution. What's the big picture conclusion the sources draw about Homo sapiens from all this?
The conclusion is pretty stark, really. All this environmental management, this continuous niche construction from the local to the continental scale, it worked. It allowed for high rates of reproduction, population growth, and that incredible global spread we talked about.
We were successful because we could manipulate the environment so effectively.
Essentially, yes. Our ability to modify habitats almost everywhere we went, to maximize the resources we needed, turned Homo sapiens into, as one source puts it, the world's most successful invasive mammal.
Invasive mammal, that's a provocative way to put it.
It is, but it captures that sense of massive success coupled with unavoidable ecological disruption. We didn't just adapt to environments, we aggressively adapted environments to us. And that strategy allowed us to conquer the globe.
Right, and that success, that ability to settle down by managing our environment, leads us directly into the next, perhaps darker chapter, Section 3. The immediate and pretty devastating price of that success. The sources talk about a Neolithic bottleneck.
Yeah, this is where the story takes a sharp, ironic turn. All that success in managing the environment allowed people to become more sedentary, to settle down in larger groups for longer periods.
The beatings of villages, maybe small towns.
Exactly. And this created something entirely new in human experience. The multi-species resettlement camp, as one scholar calls it.
Multi-species, meaning not just humans.
Right. You've got growing numbers of people living cheek by jowl, but you also increasingly have their managed animals, dogs already, soon maybe goats, sheep, pigs, cattle living in close proximity too. Plus, inevitably, the less welcome fellow travelers, rats, mice, insects, all attracted to the stored food and waste.
A whole new ecosystem concentrated in one place.
Mm-hmm.
And crowded. Much more crowded than their mobile ancestors ever experienced.
Dramatically so. Think about it. For hundreds of thousands of years, if your camp got messy, if waste built up, if someone got sick, you moved. Problem solved, more or less. Nature cleaned up behind you.
But now you're staying put, committed to the location, to the fields, the houses, the storage pits.
Exactly. And that density, that permanence, created a whole new set of problems. It introduced what the sources call a new and rigorous selection pressure. And that pressure came from disease. Pathogens.
Diseases that couldn't really take hold in small, mobile bands.
Precisely. Many infectious diseases need a certain minimum population density to sustain transmission. In small, scattered groups, an outbreak might burn itself out quickly, but in these larger, settled Neolithic communities, they provided the perfect breeding ground.
So new diseases start emerging, or old ones become much more virulent?
Both, probably. The sources talk about devastating new illnesses sweeping through these early villages, often leaving people, quote, not knowing what hit them. Completely unfamiliar plagues.
And the fundamental cause wasn't some new technology or specific food. It was just the crowding itself.
Overwhelmingly, yes. The basic cause was density. Think about sanitation, lack of clean water sources, difficulty in disposing of human and animal waste effectively, constant close contact between people. It's a recipe for disaster.
Perfect conditions for fecal-oral transmission, respiratory diseases, everything.
Absolutely. And this led directly to massive epidemics. The evidence suggests these early Neolithic villages likely suffered huge mortality events, potentially wiping out large percentages of the population at times. This is the demographic bottleneck. Population growth wasn't smooth. It was likely punctuated by catastrophic die-offs.
That sounds utterly horrific. It raises a huge question. Why stick with it? If settling down meant facing these terrifying new plagues, why didn't people just, give up and go back to being mobile hunter-gatherers? Was the food security really worth that price?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Part of it might be commitment. Once you've invested heavily in building houses, clearing land, creating storage, it's hard to just walk away.
Sunk costs.
Sunk costs, exactly. Plus, while early farming might have been initially less healthy in some ways, it perhaps offered a different kind of predictability, especially with stored grains, compared to the uncertainties of hunting and gathering. Maybe that predictability became addictive even with the disease cost.
A trade-off. A very harsh trade-off.
A very harsh trade-off. They were kind of stuck, committed to this new, crowded, but potentially more productive way of life, even as it was biologically devastating them initially.
And you mentioned the multi-species aspect. The animals living close by, we have to talk about zoonosis, right? Diseases jumping from animals to humans.
Undeniably a huge factor. Zoonoses were almost certainly a major component of these new crowding diseases. Think about it. Sharing water sources contaminated by animal dung, close contact during milking, butchering, living near animal enclosures, breathing in dust from animal bedding.
Direct exposure.
Constant direct exposure. Diseases that might have circulated relatively harmlessly within animal populations suddenly had a dense, susceptible human population right next door to jump into. Things like measles evolving from rinderpest, maybe smallpox from cowpox.
No.
The links are strongly suspected.
Can we see this catastrophic mortality in the archaeological record? In the cemeteries from this period?
It's actually quite difficult to pinpoint specific epidemics in early cemeteries. Sometimes mass death leads to hasty, disorganized burials that are hard to interpret. Other times, a site might just be abandoned if the population crashes.
So the evidence is indirect.
Often, yes. We see signs of demographic stress periods where settlements shrink or disappear. But it's hard to say this mass grave was definitely Plague X. However, the overall picture strongly suggests that these early concentrations of people were periodically, quote, all but exterminated by diseases for which they had absolutely no prior immunity.
Just waves of death washing over them.
It seems likely. The ability to sustain these larger communities, to grow the population, was bought at an incredibly high price in terms of episodic, massive mortality.
So if the bottleneck was that severe, how did humans ever get through it? How did populations eventually stabilize and start growing again, leading to the civilizations that followed?
Through biology, essentially. Brutal biological adaptation. Two things happened over the long run. First, there might have been some selection for genetic resistance, though that's hard to prove. More importantly, populations developed collective immunity.
Herd immunity.
Well, the precursor to it. The crucial shift was from diseases being epidemic, sweeping through a totally naive population with devastating effect, to becoming endemic.
Meaning the disease became a constant presence in the population.
Exactly. It was always around. And this changed the dynamic. As the source notes, only those who survive get to pass on their genes and, crucially, their immunity. Over generations, a new pattern emerged.
What pattern was that?
Childhood infection became the norm for many of these diseases. If you contracted measles, mumps, maybe smallpox, polio, infectious hepatitis as a child and you survived.
Which many didn't, presumably.
Which many didn't,
Yeah.
Absolutely. Infant and child mortality must have remained appallingly high. But if you did survive, you generally had lifelong immunity. Ah, okay. So the disease is still there, still dangerous, especially for the very young, but it doesn't wipe out entire communities of adults anymore.
Precisely. The pathogen and the host population reached a sort of uneasy truce, a, quote, stable and less lethal pathogen-host relationship, as the sources put it. The diseases became endemic childhood illnesses, for the most part.
Except for maybe some really nasty ones.
Well, things like whooping cough and meningitis could still be very dangerous even for young children who had survived other things. But the major epidemic killers became, over time, survivable for enough people to maintain the population.
So the very foundation of demographic stability that allowed later cities and states to emerge was this hard-won endemic immunity, bought by the deaths of countless children in those early Neolithic villages.
That's the hidden biological cost of civilization, yes. That collective immunity, achieved through immense suffering and sacrifice, allowed populations to finally stabilize, maintain a consistent labor force, and eventually begin the sustained growth that characterizes the later Neolithic and Bronze Age. It's a sobering thought. But even after navigating this epidemiological nightmare, there seems to have been another major delay. The actual spread of the full farming package, domesticated plants and animals together, took a surprisingly long time, didn't it?
The time lag is really striking. You take the full agricultural system that developed in the Fertile Crescent, say around 9000 BC, for that complete package to reach and become established in somewhere like Britain, it took roughly 5,000 years.
5,000 years, that's an enormous amount of time. It wasn't just a matter of people not hearing about it, surely.
No, ideas and people were moving. It suggests there were significant breaks on adoption. It wasn't just about knowing how to plant a seed or herd a goat.
What were the breaks then?
Well, several possibilities. Local climates needed to be suitable and stable enough for these new crops, many adapted to warmer regions. But perhaps more importantly, you needed the people. You likely needed sufficient demographic recovery from that disease-induced bottleneck.
You needed enough healthy adults to do the intense labor required.
Exactly. Full-scale farming, clearing land, planting, harvesting, processing. It's incredibly labor-intensive compared to most foraging strategies. It's highly probable that many groups simply couldn't afford the labor investment until their populations had stabilized and grown somewhat, thanks to that developing endemic immunity.
So they had to survive the disease environment they created before they could fully commit to the agricultural system that helped create it.
It looks that way. The biological adaptation, surviving the bottleneck, seems to have been a necessary precondition for the full geographic spread and intensification of agriculture. The pace of the revolution was dictated in large part by disease and immunity. #tag outro.
Wow. Okay, this deep dive, looking at that huge span from 20,000 to 5,000 BC, it's really unveiled this incredibly complex and frankly quite dramatic transformation.
It really has. We've traced humanity's path from being these incredibly ingenious, widespread ecosystem managers.
Using fire, selective hunting, manipulating water, really mastering their local environments on a global scale.
Right. To then becoming these densely packed, often disease-ridden communities in the early Neolithic. And the irony is that second stage was a direct, if unintended, consequence of the success of the first stage.
The core environmental shift wasn't really a new tool, was it? It was the sheer concentration of life. Humans, animals, waste, pathogens, all crammed together.
That concentration, driven by intensifying resource management, created those multi-species resettlement camps. And that, in turn, unleashed this brutal new selection pressure from diseases, forcing this radical biological adaptation through immunity.
And what really hits home, I think, is the staggering biological price tag attached to what we call progress. The move towards settled life, towards agriculture. It wasn't a simple triumphal march.
Not at all. It was a slow, incredibly painful negotiation with our own biology and the pathogens we inadvertently cultivated, purchased at the cost of, frankly, unimaginable levels of mortality, especially for the young, over generations.
So that eventual survival, the population growth that kicks off after 5000 BC and enables everything that follows, it was literally paid for by those early generations who endured that demographic bottleneck.
It sets this profound historical precedent, doesn't it? Every major leap in human organization, starting with sedentism itself, seems inextricably tangled up with creating new environmental and epidemiological challenges. Challenges that demand immense societal adaptation and biological cost to overcome.
It makes you think. That hard-won knowledge, that ability to manage pathogens, mostly through developing endemic immunity, which cost those early Neolithic people so dearly, it's like this hidden biological foundation under everything we've built since. All our cities, our global trade, rely on that ancient, costly adaptation.
A foundation built on sacrifice.
So the provocative thought maybe is, what environmental or biological sacrifices are underpinning our current stability?
Right.
And is the adaptive toolkit we inherited from those ancestors going to be enough for the challenges we're engineering now?